Look at the play Macbeth, and specifically looking at the character of Lady Macbeth and her downfall as the play progresses. First of all, we're going to be comparing her presentation in Act 1 and Act 5 directly, contrasting how she's presented in these acts. But also we're going to be having a look at her characterisation throughout, and I'm going to leave you with a task to do that explores her character change and her transformation throughout the play. If you're thinking about your exams, this video is going to be particularly helpful for English literature, paper 1 for your GCSEs. Okay, so let's have a look at how Lady Macbeth is presented in Act 1. Let's just remind ourselves of what happens in terms of this character, and then we'll have a look at some key extracts from the act. So in this act, she receives a letter from her husband outlining his meeting with the witches and the prophecies. Most importantly, the prediction that they've made that he will become king. She's incredibly eager for him to gain the crown, but is fearful that he's too kind to commit the deeds that are going to be required to take the crown from King Duncan. So she calls upon the spirits to make her even stronger and more powerful, and she manages to persuade her husband that it's a good idea to commit the regicide, even when he wavers in that decision, even when he decides that he doesn't want to proceed any further with the killing. She manages to tell him that it is the best idea, and he is eventually persuaded to kill the king. Let's have a look at some key extracts from the act then. So the first one here comes from Lady Macbeth's soliloquy in Act 1. And this is just after she's received the letter from Macbeth. And she says, "Hie thee hither." So she wants him to arrive at the castle quickly. So get here quickly. And she wants to pour his spirits into his ear. Which alludes to this idea of supernatural wickedness that she wants to persuade him with. And finally, she wants to chastise with the valour of her tongue. So to chastise means to discipline or to rebuke or to tell off with the strength of her persuasion, all that impedes thee from the golden round. So anything that stops him from getting the crown. So not only does she want him to arrive quickly so that she can begin her malevolent persuasion, but she also wants to remove any barriers through her persuasion, through her speech, to him becoming king. So she seems very, very much in control here. She is the one that is going to persuade her husband. She's going to lead this plan of regicide and ensure that there is nothing stopping them from becoming king and queen. The second extract we're going to look at is a short extract from her soliloquy, and she calls upon the supernatural spirits. She asks them to unsex her, so to remove any trace of masculinity or femininity. She wants to be filled with cruelty and evil, and she wants to stop any remorse that she might feel. So she wants to stop any feelings of guilt. Now, in removing any trace of masculinity or femininity, she's thus removing any ability to feel any human emotions. And she sees that as making her less vulnerable and thus even more powerful. And then finally, the last extract, this follows Macbeth's decision not to go through with the regicide. And this is her response to his change of heart. She really emasculates her husband here. So she questions his masculinity. When you just do it, then you're a man. You would be so much more the man. So that repetition of man suggests that she is questioning his strength, his physical and emotional strength and power. And that actually, to her, he seems very weak at the moment in him questioning whether he will go through with the regicide. To support this even more, she really gruesomely tells him that if she had promised her husband to do so, she would have dashed the brains out of her own baby while she was breastfeeding it. Now, this really violent image suggests that she is physically and mentally stronger than her husband, because she contrasts her own strength and her own resolution to do such a terrible act with his own weakness and his desire not to commit the regicide. And so throughout this act, she seems very, very powerful, very in control, constantly leading Macbeth to the decisions that she wants him to make. So what's she like in Act 5 then? Let's just remind ourselves that in Act 5 we have the sleepwalking scene. So Lady Macbeth is watched over by her gentlewoman and a doctor as she sleepwalks and talks to herself in her sleep. She's hallucinating. Of course, in the midst of this impending battle, this attack from Malcolm and Macduff and the English forces that is happening to Macbeth and Dunsinane Castle. In Act 5, she dies, and Macbeth is told that she is dead, shortly before Macbeth goes on to be killed by Macduff. So how is she presented in this act? So one of the extracts we're going to be having a look at is this one. If you take some time to read it there. She is hallucinating here. She's sleepwalking and she is seeing spots of blood on her hand. Now, just as Macbeth mentioned in Act 2, the blood is there to remind them of their guilt. And the terrible deed that they've committed, the regicide. So that symbolism is really, really important and mirrors the symbolism in Act 2, when Macbeth was worrying that all of Neptune's oceans would never clear the blood from his hands. And here we have Lady Macbeth seeing that blood again, and she describes it as a damned spot. So damned, it means to be sent to hell for eternity. And of course, she mentions hell being murky as well. So she's very, very aware of this punishment for their actions, that she will be damned for all eternity for committing this regicide. She also, in a very disordered, really confused way, jumps to recalling Macbeth's own fear, and she questions, can you be a soldier and afraid? And she tries to convince him. She's sleep talking, obviously, that they are powerful enough for him not to need to feel fear. And then, in a really confused way again, she jumps to recalling King Duncan and the blood that was spilled when she returned to his chamber with the daggers. So she's really anxiously recalling some of these events that she's witnessed and been a part of. She's doing so in a really disordered way. Lots of punctuation use by Shakespeare here, again, to support that idea of a really disordered mindset. She can't articulate her feelings coherently, and she's certainly suffering from a huge degree of emotional turmoil. A little bit further into that scene, she describes the image of the smell of the blood. Again, this is symbolic of her inability to escape that guilt of murdering King Duncan. And it really suggests that she is vulnerable to that guilt that she tried to rid herself of when she called upon the spirits in Act 1. That's been futile. It's ironic that she is at this point still suffering from the guilt of the murder, because she was so dismissive of it in Act 2. And of course, she tried to rid herself of guilt in Act 1. And then finally, in the same scene, she urgently needs to rest. So she repeats this imperative, to bed. Unfortunately, as Macbeth in Act 2 suggested when he said that he had murdered sleep, with such a guilty conscience and such emotional turmoil in the mind, she is unable to rest or be at peace with what she's done. And of course, here in this one, she admits that their terrible, treacherous deeds cannot be reversed. What's done cannot be undone. And so this is Lady Macbeth at her most vulnerable, at her most troubled here. She's certainly not the powerful, in control character that she was in Act 1. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with a task. I would like you to, on a graph, plot Lady Macbeth's downfall as the acts progress throughout the play. What I'd like you to do is plot key references, so key moments in the play, such as asking the spirits to take away her human feelings or planning Duncan's murder, thinking about where on that graph chronologically they should go, and how powerful she is at that moment. I'd also like you to add key quotations as well. There are some here, and potentially a little bit of analysis of those using those keywords on the right there. There are lots of examples on the screen, of course, that you can use on your graph tracking Lady Macbeth's downfall, but to really, really push your understanding of the character, you can collect more references and more key quotes from the play as well. Okay, let's pause the video. Let's stop the video there then for you to have a go at that task. Thanks for listening. Do sign up to the English at Penrice YouTube channel for more videos that will support your English literature and language work.